Hi everyone, this is Nick from AVLI. I know you guys have been doing a lot of work with assessments, formative assessments, maybe some alternative assessments, and hopefully learning some more about ways to kind of mix it up in class and make sure that when we go back to school, whether it's remote, whether it's in person or blended, everybody has a good game plan for the year. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about learning beyond the test, or even a little bit of the test as a learning process or as part of a larger goal, as opposed to the test as the goal in and of itself. I'm going to borrow from a previous PowerPoint that I've made about digital game-based learning, and a lot of this comes into play there as well. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to send me an email, and I can get the dialogue started there. So I used to coach basketball, which was well, this is outside of the presentation, but not the greatest experience. I'm not all that competitive, I guess. But what we found out as I coached for 10 years, and what we found out as coaches, that there's kind of this Venn diagram between a practice player, somebody that could do things really well in practice, and these people typically had the best footwork and they could follow directions very, very well. So if you broke down a drill and told them exactly what to do, these people could listen to that, they could see it, and they could sort of repeat it, memorize it, and then do it with their body. Okay. And then there was the games started. When the games started, which I guess could sort of be like the test, but I would even argue it's the point of all of it, right? Like the game is the point of practice. So if you're doing well in practice but not doing well in the game, it does not matter. And if you're doing well we'll get to that in a second. Okay. What we found out was a lot of these people, a lot of the students, players, that when it was broken down into a self-contained drill, they did really well because they were comfortable in that particular circumstance. But then when the game started, I was finding that there was not a ton of overlap, maybe a 1 out of 3 overlap between the people that did really well in the practice drills, the way we had practice set up, and then guys who actually performed in the games. I found that a lot of times with freshmen, the first 5 players that I thought were the best 5 players on the team were definitely not the best 5 players on the team, and maybe only 1 or 2 of them actually ended up being one of the top 5, because there were kids who, when it was broken down into a simulation, a self-contained simulation, a drill for the sake of the drill, didn't quite understand, didn't quite have the correct footwork. But then or didn't have their hand in the right place or make the right pass or whatever in that particular drill for the drill's sake. But then when the game turned on and there were fans there, mostly their parents, honestly, but with the fans there, and the game mattered, and people were watching, coaches were watching, and whatever they did in the drill, or sorry, in the drill didn't matter anymore. There were certain kids who had other skills, competitiveness, other athletic skills that kind of went through. They were good for basketball, but they were good for all sorts of other sports as well. And there was a lot of things about a good practice player that fit into this part of the Venn diagram that did not necessarily fit into this. Okay, and again, a lot of what we wanted was for practice to simulate the game, but it was not necessarily happening that way. I think with school, we've got a very similar thing happening, and it's dangerous, but it's been going on for, I don't know, since 1850 maybe, or a little bit after that. What we teach in school has started to become self-contained. Okay, school has become a skill, but what we end up doing, and I'm talking even if we're doing a project like a PBL unit or an IBL unit, like those things are designed to be authentic and designed to get the learner interested, and designed, I guess, to sort of like make it a little bit outside of the box. But if it doesn't make it into this area, there's no point, right? There is no point in teaching kids to memorize something and then testing them on memorizing if it doesn't end up here. There is no point in creating a PBL unit where they end up putting on a Shakespeare play, maybe. That's great. That is a cool thing. However, if you're teaching an English class and your project ends up with them reenacting a play, they don't do well on it or something like that. Are we saying that we're assessing their English skills as poor because they were bad actors or something like that? That to me falls in. It's cool. It's a neat idea. It's a nice idea for an activity, maybe to point out some larger ideas about tone and how something's acted out versus how it's written, something like that, or interpretation of the text. But the acting in and of itself has no bearing on what we actually want them to do with these things. So what we're ending up with is some kids that do really, really well in school, really well, like insanely well at school. My younger brother, insanely well at school, and then, however capable, has a very difficult time translating that into what we would call, quote unquote, the real world, like into his professional life. And then there are people who are awful at school. They don't do well at school, but they nail it. They nail it when I have one of my best friends who's just like a DC student all the way through, basically through college. And this guy's like a millionaire now. And it's just from kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's other things. It's like these other soft skills that school doesn't quite get at, right? Like the things that we don't really assess or ask kids intentionally to get better at. They fall sort of curricular things that come outside of what we're talking about in class, and what we test with traditional testing, but even with stuff you might be working on now, what we test and what we assess typically falls very heavily in this bubble, and we have to be really careful to make sure that what we assess actually is them practicing something that is real. Okay, something that actually matters, and that might mean a little more work on our behalf. It might mean a little bit more planning. It might even just mean a little bit more thinking philosophically, like what will they be doing with what I'm teaching them? And if they're not doing anything with it, they don't need to know it. At this day and age, memorizing some facts and reproducing it on a test, like I could do that on my phone right now faster than any content expert could pull it up in their own head. That harkens back to a day when bound books weren't even around and we had to memorize stuff in order to keep it from generation to generation. I'm not saying memorization is bad, but I am saying that memorization is literally just the beginning. It's a vocabulary thing. It's a I don't know, like you need to sort of understand the different cogs or machine parts, I suppose, to put the machine together. But a lot of times we stop at that. Oh, this guy knows this information. This girl understands this because she was able to take my opinion as a teacher or the facts that I gave her as a teacher, and then she put them back down verbatim on a test or in some presentation. That did not take place outside of school. It did nothing in the real world at all. What we've asked them to do is something that is school. It's a hoop. They jump through it, and then the goal is to be done with school. Forget it forever, right? Like I want to get finished with school so that I can start my real life. And so many kids now are rightfully making the choice, like I don't need to go to college. I want to start my real life. I want to start the real world, because we are doing a bad job of letting them recognize the fact that school learning and life learning can be and should be the same thing, and that school is just part of the real world. School is an activity that you do in the real world and therefore is connected to the real world. It's not siloed off into its own thing. And look at another one of these. So another deal here, this kind of philosophy, and you could draw a million more of these bubbles, but it really fragments the student, and they confusedly over the course of time, sometime after third grade, probably when grades start to matter, like there is a person who they are in their life. There is a person who they become at school. They act differently. And I'm not talking about behavior. I'm not talking about the whether they're polite. I'm talking about like the skills that they use in life, the skills that they use in school. And when you start to add in technology, multiple different avatars they have in different technological avenues, and you start to add in, I don't know, like maybe even just different social groups that they're part of. Like we're talking about a person, a growing young person who is asked to be 5 or 6 different people that all have 5 or 6 different skill sets, that all have 5 or 6 different behavioral standards, etc. Our job, in my opinion, is to push these bubbles as close together as possible. Obviously, there are going to be some things that shade into the corners here that are life skills that just don't necessarily fit into school or technology. There are going to be a couple things that are just kind of technology specific. I would love it if there was nothing that was just school specific, because then that's like Baudrillard's nightmare. Then we get to the point where the thing that you're teaching, like the simulation that is supposed to prepare you for this, becomes more important than this itself. Like school has gotten to the point where we care more about this number than what this is, and these things do, like this does not accurately predict this in any way. Okay, so what I know that's a sort of long introduction, and maybe I'm bearing the lead here, but like when we assess, we have to make sure, particularly as we're progressing up the Bloom's taxonomy ladder and we get to that create, what we have to do is make sure that what we're doing is asking them to do something that is not just classroom contained, not something that is public, something that they are working on outside, particularly from the Catholic context, and if I may say, particularly from the Jesuit context, where we are challenged to get out and act. You know, it's not an order that stays indoors and cloisters themselves. They get out into the community and work and help and work with people and learn about them and become part of the dominant culture, et cetera, and subcultures, whatever. Okay, so are we asking the students to take what they're learning and create a project outside of school? Is there a way that we can take maybe service hours? Is there a way that we can take things that we ask them to do, Special Olympics, et cetera, and ask them maybe to design these things using the skills that they're learning in school? Is there a way that my students, instead of learning to write an essay for the essay's sake, instead of learning what transitions are so they can do better on their essay, learning quote selection so they can do better on their essay, or all the reading skills they learn, is that just so they can get better at reading novels, or is it so they can, say, read an op-ed in the newspaper and write back? Okay, is it so they can create, maybe if you blend all these together, maybe the students are themselves taking up a specific injustice that they see in the world, and they're using their school skills and their life skills to push all these things together and create a project by which they are combating poverty, racism in our class, not when they're 40, not after they get their college degree and we say it's okay. Start doing that now. Start doing it now. Start learning by doing at the end of a unit, after they've learned the terms, after they've been assessed and start to progress. Is there a way that the students can, let's say, make a social justice podcast, for instance, and you can give them formative feedback on that, and then from that determine what they need to still learn in the following unit? Okay, so all of this is an extremely, extremely long form way of saying that we can't teach for the test and then have the test be the end of it. Okay, the ACT does that to us enough. ACT, SAT, that's the end all be all. Whatever I get on that ACT, the rest of high school didn't matter. Okay, and that causes cheating, and it causes like motivations to be skewed, and kids lose what it is. They lose that love of learning because what they want is the love of score. It's sort of a Pavlovian behavior. What happens when we take that score away now? What happens when you go into life and someone's not giving you an alphanumeric grade for everything you do? Your motivation is sapped, or you have to develop new motivation because that cookie that you've always been given isn't there anymore. So just something to think about. Thank you.